I shot a video the other day discussing the 3 biggest benefits to selling used bikes, and I do want to be a little bit even-keeled about this and mention some of the downsides as well. So I definitely advocate for they are advantageous over selling new bikes. And again, the positives for selling used over new is the margin, the uniqueness of what you're offering to the marketplace, as well as the independence that comes from buying and selling used bikes. But today, we're not going to talk about what's so great about it. We're going to talk about some of the downsides. So we'll get into those now. First, the elephant in the room, sourcing. Buying and selling used bikes is not like pointing and clicking to restock your inventory online. If you're a retailer for, say, Tracker Specialized, you have a certain set of bikes that you can order in, any size, any color. Of course, that might not necessarily be the case now in our post-pandemic times where inventory is not always consistent. But generally speaking, when you sell new bikes, you can point and click to recharge your inventory. Whereas with used bikes, there's a random nature to it. You're kind of at the mercy of what bikes are going to be traded in, as well as what bikes you can find on secondhand marketplaces such as Facebook or Craigslist. So with this, you can often run into issues with customers where they will like a bike that's in your inventory, and then they'll ask you if they can get it in a different color. And unfortunately, you don't have that maneuverability. What you have in your shop is essentially what you have in your shop. It's nice that it's refreshing and you have this constant turnover of new things, but it's also a disadvantage because you can't necessarily have control over repeating a specific bike that tends to be a hot seller for you. So in the used bike world, sourcing is an art form, whereas in the new bike world, sourcing is kind of a given. So first thing to be wary of if you're going to dip into the world of selling used bikes, you do have to take into account that sourcing is going to be an additional task for you to manage. Which brings me perfectly into the second disadvantage of buying and selling used versus new, the workload. When you get a new bike into your store, it's going to show up in a box, and it's going to be a basically rinse and repeatable process to assemble that bike and get it on the floor. There are going to be some differences with higher end bikes where you have to set up electronic shifting or things of that nature, but generally speaking, bike builds are sort of a lower level mechanic skill. In fact, it's how a lot of mechanics get started. It's how I got started in a shop. When a bike comes in the box, essentially you are installing the headset, installing the pedals, and giving the bike a tune-up. When a bike comes in for used inventory, there is a whole A to Z inspection that has to be done because there is any range of things that the previous owner may have done with that bike or may have neglected with that bike. So we see stuff that needs replacement tires, grips, saddles. We have to check the chains for wear. We have to check the cassettes, which requires sometimes swapping the chain and then taking it out for a test ride and seeing if you're getting any skipping. So overall, getting a new bike in the box generally is a 30 to 45 minute assembly, whereas on average, when we get a used bike in our store, we're looking at anywhere between an hour and 2 hours of troubleshooting and fine-tuning. So that's something that you do need to keep in mind because you're juggling your service department as well. So imagine having to also tune up all of the bikes that are coming into your sales floor. You can see that during peak season, that would certainly add up. If you're at a point where you're doing 20 tune-ups a week, but you're also selling 10 bikes a week, you're essentially doing 30 tune-ups a week because those bikes are not simply just being assembled out of the box. The other thing that this complicates with your workload is it does make it a slightly higher level skill. As I said, with bike builds, that's how a lot of mechanics generally get started in a shop. But if you have a used bike coming in and you need to do a full A to Z, that's going to be something that you would only really delegate to a more experienced mechanic just due to the breadth of issues that may arise with that bike. There's also some more financial decisions to be made in that process as well, because you do have to make the call of what parts are going to be replaced. And again, that makes it a little bit tougher to delegate to somebody who would otherwise just be a bike assembler for you. So finally, our third disadvantage of selling used bikes is going to be inventory management. You'll notice that these three bleed into each other. When you have to worry about sourcing and then tuning up your bikes and kind of weighing that with your service department and your current workload, it is more of an art form to manage the inventory that's in your store. You can't necessarily control how many of one bike or one color or one size is currently in your stock. So you're more so looking at a 10,000-foot view of, do I at least have options across a reasonable size range of each category of bike? So we're not looking at having, for example, a small, medium, and large Trek FX in a range of colors. We're more so thinking along the lines of, in our hybrid section, do we have at least 12 to 15 different options with at least 1 or 2 options in each reasonable delineation of frame size? In this way, it doesn't matter if somebody comes in who's 4'11" or if they're 6'5". We'll at least have 1 or 2 options for them to swing their leg over and take for a test ride. It kind of bleeds in a little bit with the charm of doing a used bike model. You do tend to get a customer demographic that's more appreciative of the fact that they're not choosing every little aspect of the bike, but rather they're being matched with a bike that was pre-loved. Inventory management is definitely a skill that probably took us 3 or 4 seasons to really dial in, just because I was coming from the world of new bike shops and I had seen how it works in the point and click manner. And it's definitely an adjustment moving into the used bike world where you're more subject to what trade-ins are coming in as well as what bikes you can find on the marketplace. One thing that has been paramount in our inventory management strategy is what I like to call backloading. So we have there's probably a lot of shops out there that sell new bikes that do this as well. It can be advantageous to have extra storage either in the back of your shop or off-site, where during the off-season, we may buy 40 or 50 or 60 bikes, get them tuned, get them cleaned, put them into storage. And there'll be repeats of what we have on our floor. Not necessarily exact model repeats, but let's say we have 2 15-inch hybrid models on our floor right now. The other 6 that we have might get tuned and cleaned and put into storage. That way, when spring rolls around, when we sell those hybrids, we can just pull one out of storage and get it right there on the floor and not have to worry about, in that moment, doing the 1 to 2 hour process of refurbing that bike. Instead, we'll take advantage of our downtime in the winter months and we'll kind of set up the dominoes so that we have ourselves ready to go as far as inventory is concerned. So it's less so about having specific bikes in your inventory, but rather having an appropriate range across hybrids, road bikes, gravel bikes, and mountain bikes. And if there's one last thing I would add to the disadvantage of the heightened complexity of managing your inventory is with kids' bikes specifically, with our model, because we only focus on top tier brands like Trek and Giant and Specialized, we run into an issue where we don't have a lot of parents out there that are purchasing these high-end bikes for their kids, understandably so, because they might outgrow them in a few months. So our issue becomes, because we're not going to bend on quality, and we do want these top tier bikes, we A, don't have a lot of them being traded in, and B, when they are traded in, kids are kids and they're going to be rough on their bikes, and parents are often disappointed at the trade-in value that we're able to offer on these kids' bikes because we have to factor in all the replacement parts and additional labor, on top of the fact that it's not going to sell for as much as a typical adult bike. So with that, we have found ourselves in a spot where we very consistently stock a wide range of adult bikes across all the different categories, But with kids' bikes, we still find ourselves ebbing and flowing in that we sometimes have selection and we sometimes don't. Some used bike dealers out there might opt to bend on their quality standards and think to themselves, well, if it's a kid's bike, maybe I'll rehab some department store bikes so they can at least have options in here and then go on to the next size up when they outgrow it. We don't choose to take that route because we really have ingrained our reputation in quality. When you sell used bikes, the biggest stigma that you're going to battle against is trust. And we don't want to sacrifice that part of our brand to take in lower quality bikes that kids are going to be hard on. And the last thing that we need is all these kids' department store bikes coming back into the shop for service because they're not of the quality that makes sense for our warranty. So there you have it. It's not all roses and butterflies when it comes to selling used. There are some disadvantages. I would argue there's more advantages, but I did want to be even-keeled and give you a couple of the realities of selling used bikes. If you like this video, like and subscribe, and if you're interested in starting or scaling your bike shop, check out the links below.